The first frame flickers into existence like a ghost tearing through time, and suddenly Berlin is no longer a word in a history book, but a breathing ruin, captured in fragile strips of color that were never meant to survive. The sky is an exhausted gray blue, and beneath it the city sprawls like a wounded animal, its bones of stone and steel broken open, its organs exposed to the cold light of a defeated morning. These are not the polished images curated for victory parades or museum walls. These are the images that slipped through the cracks, filmed by soldiers and intelligence units who knew they were recording something the world was not ready to see. The colors are muted, almost ashamed of themselves, as if even pigment understands the weight of what it is witnessing. A woman in a threadbare coat stares into the lens with eyes emptied by too many endings. Somewhere behind her, the shell of the Reich Chancellery smolders quietly, as if still holding on to secrets that the flames could not burn away. This footage exists because someone somewhere believed that color mattered more than propaganda. Most wartime images were stripped of hue to make suffering abstract, easier to digest, easier to mythologize. But here, in these rare reels, the red of brick dust stains children's shoes, the green of Soviet uniforms bleeds into the rubble, the yellow of ration cards flutters like a warning in trembling hands. What the official films never showed was how the war didn't end on May 8, 1945, it simply mutated. In the shadows of shattered buildings, a new conflict was already taking shape, one that would never be formally declared, one that would be fought with files instead of rifles, dossiers instead of bombs, lies instead of artillery. Berlin, in color, becomes a crime scene no one finished investigating. A Soviet cameraman walks past the Reichstag, its dome blackened and perforated like a skull riddled with bullets. On the wall behind him, hastily scrawled Cyrillic signatures overlap with older Nazi slogans that no one bothered to erase yet. Each layer of writing is a psychological battlefield. The Red Army filmed these scenes not only as trophies of victory, but as evidence, proof that they had broken the heart of Hitler's empire. But even as the cameras rolled, NKVD officers were combing through cellars and bunkers, hunting for scientists, intelligence officers, and anyone who might still be useful to the next war. The footage captures smiling soldiers handing bread to German children, but it never captures the trucks that left at night, filled with men and women who would never officially exist again, deported eastward into a labyrinth of secret laboratories and interrogation centers. In one reel, an MGU Jeep rattles down a boulevard that once hosted torchlit parades. The driver glances sideways at the ruins like he's driving through a dream that refuses to end. Few viewers know that behind many of these casual patrols were units tasked with Operation Paperclip's earliest reconnaissance. While civilians scavenged for bricks and firewood, U.S. intelligence officers were cataloging the addresses of German engineers who had built the V-2 rockets, men whose hands were still stained with the labor of concentration camp prisoners. These officers carried lists hidden inside cigarette cases, names that would soon be scrubbed clean and given new American identities. The color footage shows these scientists later, emerging from bomb shelters, blinking in daylight, unaware that they were about to be folded into a new empire, their crimes quietly buried under Cold War necessity. A woman walks past a bomb crater filled with rainwater that reflects the sky like a cracked mirror. She pauses, stares into it, and for a moment the camera lingers as if sensing that something deeper is happening here. Beneath that puddle lies a tangle of sewer tunnels that had been used by the Abwehr during the last weeks of the war to move intelligence couriers between safe houses. Some of those couriers never made it out. Others slipped through Soviet lines with microfilms stitched into their clothing, carrying lists of Nazi collaborators embedded within Allied occupation forces. Decades later, fragments of those lists would resurface in declassified files, hinting that Berlin's fall did not end the intelligence war, but merely scattered its pieces into a darker, more intimate struggle. The footage shifts to a marketplace where Berliners trade watches for potatoes, wedding rings for cigarettes. Hunger becomes a currency. What no one sees are the black market networks quietly organized by former SS logistics officers who had reinvented themselves overnight.
These men controlled food distribution routes, manipulated ration cards, and funneled supplies into underground caches. Allied authorities knew about some of these operations, but tolerated them because informants within those networks provided intelligence about Soviet troop movements and NKVD safe houses. The war had taught everyone the same lesson. Morality was a luxury. Survival was strategy. A child clutches a tin cup as a British soldier ladles soup from a steaming cauldron. The child's hair is blonde, her eyes hollow. What the footage does not show is that only a few blocks away, in a requisitioned villa, MI6 officers are interrogating former Gestapo informants, trying to extract details about a rumored Soviet plan to seize hidden Nazi gold caches buried beneath Berlin's parks. Those caches were real. SS treasurers had buried looted gold, art, and documents across the city during the last weeks of fighting. Some of those troves were recovered. Others vanished into the hands of intelligence services who needed untraceable funds for covert operations. The color reels glide past the parks where children now play, never revealing the wealth still sleeping beneath their feet. The camera pans across Unter den Linden, its once grand facades reduced to skeletal silhouettes. Among the ruins, a man in a long coat slips into a doorway, glancing over his shoulder. His face is blurred, but his presence feels deliberate. In the immediate post-war chaos, Berlin became the world's largest intelligence bazaar. Former Nazis sold secrets to the highest bidder. Soviet defectors traded names for asylum. American and British agents ran safe houses disguised as bakeries and tailor shops. The color footage accidentally captures some of these figures, ghosts in daylight, men and women whose real names were never recorded. They were the architects of the Cold War's earliest betrayals, and Berlin was their laboratory.
A train station comes into view, its platforms choked with refugees carrying everything they own in battered suitcases. Among them are scientists, clerks, widows, war criminals, and future spies, all indistinguishable in the blur of displacement. What no one could see then was how many of these refugees were being screened by Allied intelligence for potential recruitment. Trauma was a tool. Desperation was leverage. A former Luftwaffe radio operator might become a CIA asset. A widow whose husband had worked for the SS might be blackmailed into translating intercepted Soviet communications. The footage shows tired faces and dusty shoes. It does not show the invisible contracts being signed in whispers. A color saturates a sudden fire, flames licking through a collapsed warehouse. Children watch from a distance, mesmerized. Fires were common in Berlin after the war, but not all were accidents. Some were deliberately set to destroy records, to erase traces of collaboration between Nazi industrialists and Allied corporations that had quietly done business with the Third Reich even as bombs fell. In the ashes of those warehouses were documents that could have exposed how certain Western companies profited from forced labor and wartime contracts. The flames were not just consuming wood and paper, they were burning histories that were never meant to be told. A Soviet officer stands atop a pile of rubble, surveying the city with a cigarette dangling from his lips. He looks victorious, but his eyes are calculating. Behind him, his men load crates onto a truck. Officially, they are war trophies. Unofficially, they are filled with advanced optics, radar components, and prototype jet engines seized from German research facilities. These technologies would accelerate the Soviet Union's military programs by years. The color footage captures the officer smiling as he salutes the camera. It never captures the scientists being forced at gunpoint into the back of another truck, bound for secret institutes in the Ural Mountains. In a dim alley, a group of German teenagers dig through rubble, searching for anything that can be traded for food. One of them pulls out a helmet, still bearing a faded SS insignia. He hesitates, then tosses it aside. Symbols have lost their power here. Or so it seems. In reality, neo-Nazi cells were already forming in the ruins, recruiting disillusioned youth, fueled by rumors that the Führer had escaped, that Germany would rise again. Allied intelligence monitored these groups closely, sometimes infiltrating them, sometimes quietly allowing them to operate to see who would reveal themselves. The war's ideology had not died.
It had simply gone underground. The footage drifts into a hospital ward filled with wounded civilians. A nurse adjusts a bandage on an old man's arm. Her hands are gentle, but her eyes are distant. Hospitals in post-war Berlin were not just places of healing, they were also interrogation hubs. Doctors collaborated with intelligence officers, administering truth serums and experimental drugs to prisoners under the guise of medical treatment. Some of those experiments were continuations of Nazi research, repurposed by the victors, who condemned them publicly while exploiting them privately. The color footage lingers on the nurse's face, unaware that she has just stepped out of a room where a man's memories are being chemically dismantled. The footage ends with a slow pan across the Brandenburg Gate, its columns scarred, its quadriga silent. The light is soft, almost forgiving, but forgiveness is an illusion here. Berlin in color is not a story of liberation. It is a story of transition, of power changing hands while keeping the same ruthless logic. The city became a chessboard where human lives were expendable pieces. Every brick that fell concealed a document. Every smile masked a calculation. Every act of kindness carried an unspoken price. These reels survived because someone hid them, knowing that they did not fit the clean narrative of victory. They reveal a Berlin where the war never truly ended, where the rubble was not just physical but psychological, where entire identities were erased and rewritten. They show us a world where the line between hero and villain dissolved into gray, and then into something even darker. In these colors, we see the birth of a new kind of warfare, one that would shape the rest of the century, fought not on battlefields, but in minds, in secrets, in the silent agreements made in ruined rooms. The footage fades, but the truth it carries does not. It lingers, unsettling, reminding us that history is not what we are shown, but what is hidden just outside the frame. Berlin after the war was not a conclusion, it was a beginning, forged in rubble and shadows, where the victors inherited not just the city, but its sins, and chose to use them.